During this period, there were also contributions to sampling and surveys coming out of the federal government due to the government's need to study the effects of the economy and the Depression. This need to assess unemployment, economic growth, and a wide range of measures of economic conditions was one of the major impetuses for the development of sampling techniques in the federal government in the 1930s. In a book by Duncan and Shelton called The Revolution in United States Government Statistics, 1926 to 76, I'm sure you'll all want to rush out and read this, or maybe wait for the movie. This book paints a picture of 4 stages in the advance of sampling methods and does a decent job of summing up the points that I'm making here. In stage 1, we saw complete enumeration of a population, as with a census. Stage 2 was intuitive sampling with no apparent use of probability and primarily based on some subjective judgments of representativeness. Stage 3 was what they called structured practice with concern for purposive bias and some mix of probability, but not exclusively probability, and still a belief that judgment played a role. And finally, stage 4, full probability sampling. Now, it's pretty clear that the social surveys of England and the early social surveys in the U.S. were clearly stage 2, intuitive samples driven by notions of representativeness, but not by any explicit sampling theory. By the 1930s, U.S. federal statistical organizations were more and more mixing the practices in a stage 3 method, but only with a vague understanding of the difference between purposive samples and probability samples. The full development of economic measurement and full representativeness moves us slowly and gradually in the 1930s from stage 3 to stage 4. Full probability. This approach to full probability was first employed in the estimation of unemployment in an experiment in the 1930s, 1933 to 34, in what was then called the trial census of unemployment. There were many differences in measures of unemployment in that period, and so when you had a debate about what the true unemployment rate was, the data were highly variable, so government had a strong interest in developing better measures of unemployment. In this 1933 and 34 experiment, the government used probability samples of households and interviews within those households to measure unemployment, rather than using measures, for example, of reports by businesses of how many employees they had, or other kinds of alternative measures. In the process, by the way, they discovered that questions of whether a person was looking for work or not have an element of psychological variability beyond just sampling alone. And so the questionnaire, the non-sampling errors, became apparent in those early experiments with probability-based unemployment measures as well. While this movement was clearly headed in the direction of probability surveys, most government statistical work still did not rely on full probability samples. But by the mid-1930s, the stage was set for the appearance of new approaches to social measurement and the arrival of national probability samples and the rise of the pollsters. And that'll be our topic for the next lecture. Thanks. Have a good day.